All right, cool. How are you, man?
How are you?
Good. Good to see you.
Yeah.
Thanks for taking the time to speak with me a little bit
Mm-hmm.
about just kind of your life.
Mm-hmm.
So just want to kind of just run through some questions, just kind of casual conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So you could, if you could start just by telling me a little bit just about yourself. What do you do currently?
Mm-hmm.
Where did you grow up? Hobbies, passions, maybe start there.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. So I am Danny Delavi, better known as Delavi, my musician name. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. Um, you know, where I guess I come from and like my background is more, I'm Puerto Rican. So I grew up as a New Rican, as they call them in New York.
Nice.
So um, yeah, and one of my, my biggest passion is obviously music.
Okay.
I grew up, not really being into music growing up. I was kind of like into sports.
Mhm.
And yeah, how I got into music was actually writing like high school musicals for my play,
Oh,
play
interesting.
with my friend,
Nice.
my good friend Ken at the time.
Mhm.
And yeah, we used to like write for like these talent show music plays, and I was pretty good at it, and he was too. So,
Mhm.
and that's what kind of encouraged me to keep going. He was actually like one of the people that he made me join like a poetry slam.
Oh, okay.
And I wound up
Wow.
winning. It was actually called the New Rican Poetry Slam.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So I
That's
wound
dope.
up winning just based off like these raps that I had in my book. But before I even entered the contest, we were in like a college, like a college recruiting summit thing.
Mhm. Mhm.
And they had like one of the tents that says "Join the New Rican Poetry Slam" or something
Interesting.
like that.
Uh-huh.
And I swear we passed that thing like 10 times, and the whole 10 times he's like, "Bro, if you don't join today, I'm never talking to you again." And
Wow.
yeah.
So he had the confidence in you.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah.
Shouts to Ken.
Yeah.
And
Nice.
yeah, so he forced me to join, and I wound up winning, and I thought that was like a cool thing, and I wound up like really falling in love with like the idea of like writing stuff. And
Gotcha. So that's like
Mhm.
that was your integration into music.
Yeah,
Basically.
that was like, I think the push that gave me the idea to think like I can do it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
Were you already kind of musically inclined at that point? Like you were already kind of making music or listening a lot to music, like kind of prior to, like, how old were you when this was happening?
Oh yeah. So me listening to music, I mean, I was always into rock.
Okay.
Yeah. And essentially, I kind of came across this band through my dad, Linkin Park, who
Mm-hmm.
kind of mixed like heavy metal and
Yeah.
then rap.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
didn't necessarily, like, I always heard rap because my dad always played like hip hop in the car and stuff.
Yeah.
He's also from New York, so he's like super into, hip hop and stuff, which I'm very grateful for, because like a lot of parents try to keep, kids away from hip hop, but I thought it was like a really cool way of expression, but I didn't necessarily know what it was at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And then yeah, through Linkin Park, I kind of like realized, oh, this is dope. Like they got the the contrast of like heavy metal, like
Mhm.
real aggressive, ways of expressing themselves through music, and then
Mhm.
like the flow of rap,
Yeah. and the
which is
flow
like
of
more
rhythm,
like
yeah.
almost like pain. Hip hop is like pain coming out,
Mhm.
like
Mhm.
translating it in a way that's not violence. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And
So,
just
yeah.
kind of the rawness of it. Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, through that experience, I kind of like realized that this is what I love. Like I love listening to this music, and then going back to the New Rican Cafe thing, it was like
Mm-hmm.
that was when I was like 17, I think. Yeah, I was
Mhm.
17, and then that's when I was like, oh yeah, this is something that I'm good at, and I actually like doing it. And luckily, I had parents that encouraged me to do it too.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's really cool. That's really unique kind of way of like getting into it through that fusion of
Yeah,
like
for sure.
rap and rock. Super interesting. So when you say New Rican, can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I think I'm going to completely butcher the timeline, so I'm not even going to say the year, but definitely in the late 1900s,
Mm-hmm.
mid to late 1900s, there was a migration of Puerto Ricans into New York City.
Okay.
And how the term New Rican came about was that Puerto Ricans essentially took over like a great like area of New York where it was like strictly, you know, Puerto Rican based families living there. I think people refer to it now as like Old Williamsburg, where it was like, you know, and even my family grew up there. Like my dad and my mom were like, you know, it was all Puerto Rican families, and they were like, they had chicken houses and stuff like that. And so I think during that time, those people coined the phrase New Rican to describe themselves as like the New York Puerto Ricans were here. And not only, and what's cool about that is like, it's almost like a new culture of Puerto Ricans that like, you know, that they cultivated over time. So it kind of like, you know, those two definitions definitely play a role in like Puerto Ricans living in New York today.
Yeah, and sort of kind of created the possibility for this kind of new identity outside of Puerto Rico to to kind of flourish and which I guess is also kind of present musically. Could you maybe kind of talk a little bit about the role of kind of coming from that background, being from Puerto Rico, and potentially its influence on you kind of musically?
Yeah, for sure. So for me, I'm not from Puerto Rico necessarily. Like I didn't come from San Juan, but and I wouldn't even say that I'm like traditionally Puerto Rican in the sense that I practice like homeland traditions. My parents were really Americanized. They are not also from Puerto Rico, so they're second generation, I think. Oh no, they're first generation. Sorry, so the first generation New Rican essentially. And so then me and my brother Darren were, you know, their first kids, and so we were, you know, essentially Americanized. So we didn't really have a concept of our culture until I would say later in our lives, like probably when we were like in our late teenage years, like 17, 18 and up. That's when I started to like really embrace the idea of like, you know, I am Puerto Rican and I am proud to be, you know, Latino. And, you know, it's a culture that I'm continuing to learn about all the time, every day throughout my life. So.
And do you all grew up speaking Spanish in the home? Or?
No, we didn't. Yeah, I actually I learned Spanish myself, like through like apps, but also just interacting with other people and stuff like that. And again, it's another thing. Like I recently went to Spain for a performance, and and that was like a whole new culture shock of like, oh yeah, there's different dialects of Spanish, you know. So that was definitely a challenge. But like I said, I'm like learning every day.
Yeah, absolutely.
More and more, you know.
Yeah, that's that's really like interesting. I think me as somebody coming from the U.S., but not necessarily having the roots, but kind of seeing how you can trace those origins to the island. You know? So that's super interesting. I was wondering if, because you mentioned Williamsburg, that's where you grew up?
No. So my parents grew up in Williamsburg.
Okay.
I grew up in Sheepshead Bay.
In where?
Sheepshead Bay. So I was born in Manhattan. Early part of my life until I was like 5 was Flatbush, New York. And then I moved to Sheepshead Bay shortly after that because my parents thought it was like a better environment. At the time, Flatbush, there was like a lot of murders, crimes, you know. And so, my parents made the right decision, just like moving to, you know, a safer area, definitely. But with that came a lot of challenges. Like, I'm pretty sure we were like one of the first Latino families there. And
in Sheepshead.
In Sheepshead Bay, because Sheepshead Bay is primarily, it was Italian and Russian. Interesting. Yeah, okay. So I dealt with, you know, tons of racism there, you know, because I obviously don't look Italian or Russian. So it was it was definitely new, and I don't think I even understood what was happening until I was older. You know?
Gotcha. Yeah. Like, so this was around what, like, say, elementary?
Yeah, I would say elementary. Yeah.
Elementary school. Mm-hmm. Okay, interesting. Yeah. That just transitions are interesting to think about.
For sure.
So this is all in Brooklyn, right?
Yeah, all in Brooklyn. So Flatbush is like middle of Brooklyn, like inland. Okay. And then Sheepshead Bay is right by Coney Island, Brighton Beach. It's
so that's further south.
Yeah, it's south.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. Cool. So I guess, you know, my interest is in thinking about not simply just music, but specifically kind of more broadly on sound.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm wondering, which is more of a niche sort of question, but if you were to describe kind of where you grew up, in terms of the environment, I guess this would, most of your time, I guess growing up, you spent in Sheepshead Bay.
I would say so, yeah.
Okay.
For sure.
How would you describe the sound of that space or that neighborhood, those communities, especially kind of like culturally, like what's sort of unique or distinct about a place like Sheepshead?
I would say the most unique thing about it is it's right by the bay. So Sheepshead Bay, it like lives up to the name. It has a huge bay in the middle. So all you hear is like seagulls, water, and people speaking Russian.
Okay.
It's literally, I think they call it now like in our time now, but not back then. They call it Little Russia. So
okay,
that's between Brighton Beach and Sheepshead Bay essentially.
Gotcha.
So yeah, so it's mostly like a lot of birds, a lot of water, which I really enjoyed. I think like growing up there, one of the things that really helped me was like being by the water. It was like really calming.
Yeah.
Always like a place to go to if you needed to think.
So more Russian than Italian.
Yeah, I think over time the kind of, like the Italian demographic for some reason kind of got pushed out to like Bensonhurst and Bay Ridge.
Interesting.
Yeah, but I know like because I know a lot of elders in the community, so like they always talk about this area used to always be Italian, like
with the
yeah. So,
typical Italian New York accent.
Yeah, for sure. So
yeah.
And now it's like this, like.
Yeah.
I need my coffee. Пожалуйста. Yeah. So,
yeah, interesting.
Yeah, but I feel blessed to have been in that area now that I'm older, just because it's like now a lot of people aren't exposed to like different cultures.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And like so now I have like an understanding of like how people interact, and even with sound, a lot of how people interact has to do with sound.
Yeah,
you know
absolutely.
What I'm saying? It's like the sound is like the way you say something and the sound that it makes behind it almost inflicts like a context.
Absolutely.
So like even if I don't understand necessarily the language, like let's say somebody's speaking Russian and I don't necessarily understand the full thing of what they're saying, I can feel the energy behind what they're saying through the sound.
Yeah.
So
the emotions are sort of
right.
resonant within like the tone or the the pitch
and now even talking about it feels like that in itself like brings a different level of like understanding like people.
Totally. Totally. And I can tell you have the accents on lock.
For sure. Yeah, no, I'm actually pretty good at doing accents. I would get like that I should go into voice acting one day, but maybe one time.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Cool. No, that's super interesting to like think about that sort of, because I think that's very relevant in terms of the work that I'm sort of trying to bring to the forefront is about kind of the sort of meshing or sort of lack of awareness of difference, but that difference being culturally not always necessarily being a bad thing, but something that actually kind of can be I think crucial to like even just thinking how we understand or make sense of identity and culture. Like it doesn't have to be so kind of fixed and being like, oh, I'm only this or I'm only that.
Right.
Like there's always this kind of like meshing and blending of, oh, I grew up in this neighborhood, so I have kind of this experience within this context, and then I moved out and then grew up here.
Yeah.
So I got this sort of other different, and that added to my identity in this way.
Yeah, for sure.
So I think that's super interesting.
Especially you, like I think what was most interesting about meeting you recently is just like, you're from Atlanta, right?
Yeah.
So going from Atlanta to France and like having that experience, I was talking about context in the sense that like, maybe not understanding fully what somebody's saying, but feeling what they're saying through their through what they're trying to project through sound or language is like it's super important, especially these days. So.
Yeah. And I've had to get used to that, just even kind of based on where I grew up and just being both here, like currently, more kind of North Atlantic based, and then also in France and just in Europe, but specifically like Paris, and just the ways that people interact with one another. Definitely, like you're saying, like there's a critical kind of way of understanding, like in the South, for instance, like Southern hospitality. It's like, just the ways that people sound.
Right.
They're like, oh yeah, these people are super friendly here for no reason. Just
exactly.
It's just kind of the way of life.
In a way where it's like, it might throw somebody off too.
They're
so not used to that
exactly.
energy,
Yeah, and there's stories that I have about that, but no, it's super interesting. So I'm wondering, like, so you're kind of mentioning a little bit about, I guess you could say, the soundscape in the neighborhood or the area in which you grew up in.
Yeah.
How did that contrast with, I guess, what you, because there's a lot of, I mean, growing up in the city, you're always in movement, right? Like, between neighborhoods across the boroughs, I imagine.
Yeah.
So, what was it like kind of growing up in a space where you come from this background that obviously you're saying kind of being second generation New Rican, but growing up in a predominantly Russian Italian neighborhood,
right,
where the soundscapes, I imagine, across those cultures are very different.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But then also as you're moving across these various neighborhoods and spaces across New York and across the city, what was it like just kind of, having to constantly have different sounds and things influence your own perception of
that's such an interesting question because I never thought about it, so it's like making me think, wow, I never thought that, like, the contrast between my area and the rest of New York is starkly different.
And I imagine even in Brooklyn.
Oh yeah. Just in Brooklyn, let's just say Brooklyn alone. If you go from South Brooklyn to, which is like Sheepshead Bay, Coney Island, to Bed-Stuy, where I played basketball, or even where I went to school, which was like, it was like deeper in Coney Island, but you had a bunch of people from different parts of the city coming into one school and stuff like that. It's starkly different, and I think it's informed how I communicate with people, because it does, and it goes back to like what I was saying about like people being exposed to different types of people and cultures. Like, I think it's definitely informed, like, knowing the person that's standing across from you, and like reading them, knowing how to read them, because that's important, and it's something that nobody ever speaks about.
I'm always fascinated about that with like big cities. Growing up in Atlanta, obviously very different in the sense that big city, but very different kind of politically, especially, right? Like, especially historically within the context.
I would say, like, even like in New York until recently, nobody ever really talked about politics like that. I think political speak, like, publicly was almost like frowned upon before maybe 2016, like Donald Trump being elected or something like that. So I guess I never experienced that, but going back to what I was saying earlier, where it was like, the sounds and energy that you get from the city, especially just riding the train. I mean, I can tell you over, 20 instances where it's like, so many different things happen just on a train cart, you know what I mean? And so that knowing when to act, when to speak, and who's speaking, and like when to take, action or leave is like really important. And sometimes, I feel like me being in those separate environments has like given me a sort of like, I guess, knowledge to like how to do those things.
Yeah, navigate. Yeah, those spaces. Yeah, because I think subway soundscapes would be a super interesting sort of.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I mean, like that's
so
something that would never end.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because
yeah.
every single day is different.
Yeah.
Completely.
So, yeah. That's super, super cool.
Yeah.
Which is very different, again, in the South, because it's predominantly car culture.
Right, yeah. You don't have like a subway system that goes through Atlanta, right?
Yeah, and then you see that even in terms of like interactions.
Right.
You know, because it's like perhaps kind of because people aren't necessarily always, especially like in downtown areas, it's probably the only places where you see that kind of like constant interaction between people.
Right.
Whereas like here, it's like everyday kind of constant, you know, people are way more on foot than they are down south.
Right.
And so you can kind of, you hear that, you know?
Yeah, for sure.
So it's really interesting. So then maybe there's kind of like that, people take a little bit more distance because they're so used to that kind of connection and interaction with people every day.
Yeah, for sure.
Whereas in the South, it's like, hey, you know, a person kind of thing.
Yeah, for sure.
So I asked you a little bit about, soundscapes kind of more broadly, like outside of, I guess if you could paint sort of in your mind, like a mental map of like what an ideal sort of soundscape would sound like, how would you describe that?
Like for me personally?
For you personally, yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah. I mean, for me, I like a lot of calming sounds. I think because I grew up by the water, I always loved the sound of the water, like going to the beach and just like, not even just going in the water, just standing by it, you know? And like, I've always like enjoyed soothing sounds. And then, you know, as a musician, even like the things that I listen to, I listen to a lot of like I mentioned to you before, I mean, one of my favorite artists, Kanye West, but also 070 Shake.
That's where I was going next.
Yeah. 070 Shake, and things like Christine and the Queens, which is a French artist.
Nice.
So a lot of the times it's like I don't really know how to describe it, I guess, in words, but it's like ominous sounds and stuff, you know, like they use a lot of like different auto-tune and vocoders and stuff like that, and it's really to invoke a feeling. It's not really about what they're saying, it's more about them expressing how they're feeling through those mediums of like you know, sound, you know, like whether, you know, sometimes people give auto-tune and vocoders a bad rap, but personally I love those things because they wouldn't be able to express themselves in the way that they want to, especially like a feeling like sadness. Sadness is so deep and complicated that sometimes using a vocoder is the only way that you can, you know, really hit that note of like saying, this is how I'm feeling, this is the pain, this is how it sounds, this is how my pain sounds right now, you know. So I tend to lean towards more of those two things, like either super calming or super like ominous and like something that's telling me how the creator is feeling, you know?
So to that point, I just think that's really interesting because I think there's always the interesting kind of either connection to, or sometimes people contrast them, but I think, you know, kind of lyrics without the kind of background bass lines or whatever might be a part of that musical production.
Yeah.
So I'm curious as to your thoughts on what the role of sound outside of lyrics has, whether it has or you see it having the capacity to kind of perform that same role of kind of describing emotions or feelings of maybe like, I don't know, a synthesizer or I don't know, like a particular bass line.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm curious as to...
I think that synthesizers, vocoders, bass lines, you know, like all those things are actually going to be the future of music. I think especially with like technology today, you know. And also, with that being said too, like large language models like ChatGPT and things like that, like I think language is something that's appreciated, but I also think that it's being phased out in some sort of way. That, I think that
something a lot about jazz, for instance.
Right.
It doesn't typically have vocals,
right?
But there's so much expression in it, within it, that you still kind of there's so much happening,
right? Exactly,
and so
I think that that's where our like society is kind of headed to. Is like where, you know, me and you one day. I mean, we might not be alive to see this, but like. One day there will be a point where like we're not communicating with words. Maybe we're communicating with frequencies, sounds, looks. You know what I mean? So when I usually think, I often think that like music kind of dictates what the future is going to be. You know? So I do think that those sounds being implemented into like music today, that will be the future. It won't be, you know. It won't be hip hop even, it won't be rap. Maybe those things will be like sort of integrated into that, but I do think that sounds and just like vocal expressions and stuff like that and bass lines, similar to jazz music, will just like that will be the music. And somebody will love, you know, like somebody will love Delavi not for the, you know, the words that he said, but just the sound that he produced.
Yeah,
you know?
the way it makes you feel.
Yeah,
kind of
and the expression behind that.
Yeah, exactly.
Sure.
Yeah, sort of affective.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, totally. No, that's amazing. Yeah, because I think I listen to a lot of like music that I don't necessarily understand, like the lyrics, like how you're going back to your earlier point about growing up in Sheepshead Bay, and just hearing Russian but not necessarily understanding it, but knowing, oh, they're saying something that either sounds important or I can feel what they're saying.
I'm sure you felt like that too when you went to France and maybe didn't know the language at first.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like trying to guess what they're
saying. So absolutely. You could tell when there's like frustration and totally, yeah, because I listen to a ton. Well, I used to, but I listen to a lot of international music. I'm more so on Amapiano right now. Right.
You're mentioning
and so you're hearing like. I don't do the click necessarily with the language, but the Osa and like Zulu and just hearing the ways that they integrate that into just the rhythms of like the pianos and the sort of jazz sounds and like the hip hop bass lines, et cetera, and like the deep house.
Yeah, for sure. And I was going to say, even with Afro beats, you know, like the rise of Afro beats in the last like 5 years, you know, it's like. I don't often, especially in America, like I don't think like a lot of Americans like know necessarily what's being said or something like that, but they know the feeling. That's what they love. You know, it's almost like when you see, when I see people that don't understand Spanish listening to Bad Bunny or something like that. You know what I mean? It's like you're not in love with the language because you don't even know what he's saying. You're in love with the feeling behind it. Right. So, and that's what I mean when I say like, in the future, I do think that it's all just going to be sound. And that's it. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's the really cool thing about music is the way that it kind of transcends those otherwise like really imaginary but real at the same time kind of like fixed identities that we create of ourselves, and then we see, oh yeah, we're listening to something like when you think about, you know, like Korean music and you saw the way that Gangnam Style like basically
that's a perfect example,
took off everywhere. People were like, oh yeah, I don't know what that means, but it's the way it kind of, you know, made people vibe.
I didn't even know if Gangnam Style was a word, you know?
Exactly.
Gangnam Style, that's it.
yeah, so totally. And that's what I just kind of really like about music is the way that it kind of transcends all those kind of really like human made
it breaks barriers.
Ways of constructing like self.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, so I was gonna just, I guess, kind of ending with a lot of what you were starting on with like the music that you listened to growing up, which you talked about a little bit, but what artists, and I think you mentioned Kanye and then you mentioned a couple of others. Could you kind of just rewind a little bit and speak about that in terms of either vocals? I would be interested in terms of like vocality, but also just kind of just like music production more broadly, about your influences.
Oh yeah, as a musician. So
or even beyond.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think who I am as a musician definitely reflects who I am as a person, which is like experimental. I'm always open to like trying new things. I think if like anybody's like a fan of my music, they kind of know that I do a lot of different like genres and stuff like that, or I'm very experimental. But yeah, I would say, you know, just being introduced to hip hop and rock through Linkin Park. I mean, their whole catalog, every single song for the most part, is different. It, you know, its job was to invoke that feeling of like of pain, sadness, and you know, and sometimes triumph too. You know, so it's not always about those feelings. It's also about winning, which I love about Kanye West too. Is like, you know, why I love Kanye West is because, you know, when I was a kid, he served my ego, my inner ego. You know, it's like giving the listener confidence, you know, which is I think rare these days, because I think a lot of people play on, you know, those deeper feelings like pain, love, you know, things like that. But I think a lot of the times nobody's really, you know, feeding the ego, and I think ego is important for the human race. I mean, we wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for ego. You know? Like this table doesn't get made without ego. You know? So, agreed. And that, I think that goes with anything like jazz music in general. You know, like any artist that I listen to, like none of that gets made without a little sprinkle of ego in there. So so I think all those things kind of like influenced me to like have the confidence in myself to try different things. Understand myself and my emotions, and you know, because you know, I started off as a hip hop artist, but I can definitely say I'm probably not a hip hop artist like through and through today. I'm more like an alternative, you know, singer or whatever you want to label me at that day. You know what I mean? But
and I like that. I like that it's not like fixed to like, I'm this type of artist and this is kind of my. I like that you kind of you wear different hats, kind of based on whoever you are in that moment. Right,
exactly. And every day, you know, I can truly say that every day is different for me. You know, not that I'm bipolar or something, but like, what I mean is like, I definitely I'm human. I feel different emotions, and I'm okay with that. You know what I mean? And I think so. You know, back to your question about the artists that I listen to, it's like I listen to a lot of artists that are okay with being imperfect, okay with being egotistical, okay with you know. Feeling how they're feeling that day, and I let that kind of guide my own like compass to see like what I'm gonna make today based on that. You know?
I think for me I was really into, because I grew up in Atlanta in a context where like there was only one way, or it felt like there was sort of one way to like perform blackness,
right?
And so when I first heard like Odd Future. And then I also like heard like Childish Gambino. For me, were kind of the artists that when I first sort of started to like really like move towards hip hop, because I had a very similar experience with music and not necessarily having that it was more of like an inner compass. Just like, like this genre, this production of this particular type of sound or music and the lyrics behind it seem important now based off of what I'm experiencing now. And so it led me to kind of, when I didn't know, especially in terms of identity, there was sort of a crisis where I was like, well, am I black? Like, how do I be black authentically? And so those artists were like, there isn't one way to be. You know, there was, you know, it's like whatever you want it to be, kind of thing, you know. And so I can relate, because those artists kind of like were like, oh yeah, you're the person that's grown up in a context where, oh yeah, you were called like the Oreo or the like the wannabe white boy or that sort of thing, and it was just like, no, I just like wearing these kind of clothes or like listening to this kind of music, and
you are who you are,
and that's it, you know. So I like that, you know, it's that was very much my experience as well, like with music and just culture and identity. And I think that's why I ended up finding myself gravitating towards people that came from other places and communities, because that was always my experience as well. It's like, well, I don't fit in here, so I kind of have to branch out, kind of thing, you know.
And I think that's in itself, that's like a beautiful thing, you know, because it's like, letting your inner compass guide you to like, expanding your horizons and just like not listening to, what people say you have to do, because at the end of the day, we only have one life. I mean, I know that's really cliche, but I think that like, we have to be who we are and explore the possibility of us growing and changing to be something different than we are today, like I'm a musician today, but in 10 years from now, who knows, I might be, working with a scientist on something or something like that, which is not above the realm of possibility. Like I do think that like, these opportunities, they come, and hey, you might as well just explore new horizons and stuff like that. So.
And unapologetically as well.
Right, exactly.
Because I think before I would be like, oh, well, do I have the right to do this? And can I exist in this space and be black at the same time? Or, and like now it's just kind of like, this is who I am. This is where I am right now.
Yeah, and
this
nothing,
is
I was going to say nothing proves that more than sound, I feel like, too, because sound is constantly shifting into different spaces and different mediums, and I do think that in a way it like flows like water, and so we have to flow like water too, to be able to change.
That's what I love about like featuring with like musicians and how they have featurings with like other artists, but then you'll see that sort of like diversity in terms of, I don't know, you might see like a Burna Boy and I don't know, like an American like hip hop artist.
One of my favorite artists named John Bellion, he did a song with Burna Boy a couple years back, and I was just like, what the fuck?
The fusion of those.
Because you would never like, they're like, John Bellion's like an American, American pop songwriter, I would say, and then Burna Boy obviously does Afro beats and stuff like that. So I was like, wow, this is
what's
like,
happening
first of all, how did this even connect? So that's an interesting point too. I do definitely love like when people collaborate and like it's like something, and I mean to that point, speaking to my own journey, it's like one thing I didn't mention was how I really got into rap, where I was like really just locked in, was when Linkin Park and Jay-Z did like a collaboration tape back in the early 2000s, and like I said, my dad was playing a lot of hip-hop, a lot of Linkin Park. One day he put that on, I swear I still play that to this day.
Nice. It sits with you, it stays there.
Exactly. We'll let that sound pass. But it definitely stays there, and it's like a perfect point to what you were saying.
Because it made me think a lot about the ways that I don't even necessarily feel like it's a persona, but like people would ask me if I was into K-pop, and I was like, no, I think I'm more into like this kind of sound, and you could see the ways that like sort of like 90s R&B was influencing like Korean pop artists because of like the songs that you would hear, like Jay Park or another artist, Hayes, who's like really good as well, but like even in their sound, I think another one's name is I'm trying to think of his name right now, Zion T. So the artists like those, where it's like you hear it and you're just like, obviously it's in Korean, but just the melody or the rhythm, or just especially like the vocality, and you're just like, this sounds like it could be from here. Like these are, for sure. So you could see the fusion of just like the influence of the ways that the music kind of travels and the sounds travel, and it creates these kind of possibilities for like new identities in places where that you don't even necessarily associate with, like, oh yeah, Korean and R&B, and how does that...
Right, and think about like, I mean, I've never been to Asia, but think about the dynamic of how Asian culture might have been back in the day before that R&B sound was introduced. Yeah. It literally invokes a whole new way of thinking. It's not just an emotion, it's just like a whole new way of thinking about a certain situation.
Absolutely.
That you're going through, an emotion that you're feeling, stuff like that. It's like, it changes the culture, literally just shifts the whole ground. So
new identities, new ways of being. You see, like even just the ways that the artists themselves are influenced also by like the dress from that time, but even like now. So
the way Koreans dress now, man. I mean, there's
Yeah.
no doubt that hip hop, R&B, you know, all those cultures.
Yeah.
They created these. You know, these new cults and cultures and stuff like that. So it's pretty dope.
Well, we're like 40 minutes in. Maybe we should.
Oh yeah.
But I think this is a good place to potentially end, and
for sure.
This was great though. I think it was really cool.
Thanks for talking.
Thanks for chatting, Danny Delavíe.
Delavíe. If anybody wants to follow me, you can follow me at DELAVIE sound. And then everything else is just Delavíe music. Just type in Delavíe in Spotify, and hey, you got me. So,
there you go. Appreciate it. Let's stay in touch.
Yeah, for sure.
And keep this going.
Yeah, definitely.
For sure. Yeah.
Definitely.
All right.